The rain wasn't just falling in Oak Creek. It was hammering the earth, trying to wash away sins that had been baked into the asphalt for decades. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind where the gray sky chokes out the sun long before dusk. The air smelled of ozone, wet concrete, and the high-octane fumes of the Iron Vanguards Motorcycle Club. They rolled into the pump stations of Big Al's truck stop like a thunderstorm made of chrome and leather. 12 bikes, 12 men who looked like they had chewed up the law and spit it out miles ago. Their engines cut, creating a sudden ringing silence that was louder than the roar itself.
Inside the diner attached to the station, the clinking of silverware stopped. Conversations died in throats. The patrons, tired truckers, weary mothers, and a pair of local deputies nursing lukewarm coffee, turned their heads. Fear is a funny thing. It's instinctual. When you see men like Bishop, the Vanguard's road captain, a man whose arms are maps of ink and scars, you don't make eye contact. You look down. You pray they just want gas and coffee. But on this night, the fear in the room wasn't focused on the bikers. It was focused on what was happening in the parking lot, just beyond the glass. Bishop had just kicked his kickstand down. He wiped the rain from his beard, his eyes scanning the perimeter, old habits from a war he never really came home from. He reached for the fuel nozzle, but he froze. His hand hovered in midair, because there, standing right in the blind spot of his rear tire, was a child. A little girl, maybe 7 years old. She was soaking wet. Her pink windbreaker was dark with rain, her sneakers muddy and worn. She wasn't running away. She wasn't hiding behind a parent's leg. She was standing barely 3 feet from a machine that weighed 800 pounds and could crush her without trying. And she was trembling. What in the hell? Kid, you got a death wish? Where are your parents? Hey, you're standing in the oil slick a little bit. You need to back up now. Most kids would have bolted the second Bishop's gravel-filled voice hit the air. But she didn't flinch. She took a step closer. Her tiny hands were clenched into fists at her sides, white-knuckled. The other bikers, men named Tank, Rook, and Deacon, stopped their fueling. The atmosphere shifted from routine pit stop to high alert. Was this a setup? A distraction while someone jacked a bike? But Bishop looked down, really looked down, past the rain and the grime. He didn't see a threat. He saw desperation. Raw, unfiltered desperation that he hadn't seen since his days in the sandbox overseas. Before Bishop could answer, the blue and red strobe of a police cruiser washed over the gas station, painting the wet pavement in colors of authority and trouble. The deputies inside the diner were standing up. The little girl flinched, not at the biker, but at the police. That was the tell. That was the moment Bishop knew this wasn't just a lost kid. This was a soul screaming into the void, and for some reason, she decided the only ones who could hear her were the monsters on motorcycles. Before we find out why a 7-year-old girl is terrified of the police, but running toward a biker gang, I need to ask you a question. When you see something that doesn't fit, a shadow in a window, a child acting strange, a plea for help disguised as silence, do you walk away or do you stop? If you believe the true virtue is found not in how you look, but in how you act when the innocent are in danger, then welcome home. You're in the right place. Smash that like button, subscribe to Vest in Virtue, and turn on notifications.
because today's story is going to prove that sometimes the only difference between a villain and a hero is who they're fighting for. Comment "I stand watch" below if you're ready for this ride. The cruiser screeched to a halt, blocking the exit. Officer Miller, a man with a gut that strained his uniform and eyes that had seen too much apathy to care anymore, stepped out. He didn't draw his weapon, but his hand rested heavily on the grip. His partner, a rookie named Evans, looked nervous, eyeing the 12 bikers who were now forming a loose semicircle around Bishop and the girl. It was a standoff, the kind that happens in small towns where everyone knows the hierarchy. Police, locals, outsiders, in that order. "Lily!" Miller shouted, his voice cracking over the sound of the rain. "Get away from them! I told your mama I'd bring you home if I saw you wandering again. You're bothering these folks." "She ain't bothering nobody, officer, but she seems mighty scared of you. Care to explain why a little girl would rather stand in the rain with the Iron Vanguards than get in a warm cruiser with the law?"
The little girl, Lily, looks up at Bishop. Her face is wet with rain. She whispers something. "Because he won't listen. Nobody listens. The lady in the walls, she stopped screaming yesterday. We have to go now, please, before she sleeps forever."
The lady in the walls. The words hung in the humid air like smoke. Bishop felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He looked at his brothers. Tank cracked his knuckles. Deacon zipped up his vest. No words were exchanged. They didn't need a vote. The gas pumps clicked off. The engines hadn't even cooled down yet, but the ride wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, they weren't riding for the thrill. They were riding for the truth. To understand why a 7-year-old girl would put her life in the hands of a motorcycle club, you have to understand Oak Creek. It's the kind of town they print on postcards. The grass is always green, the fences are freshly painted, and the neighbors always wave. It's a place where people believe that if you don't talk about the darkness, it can't touch you. It was a fortress of denial. And 3 weeks ago, Lily Rodriguez was just another happy kid living in this bubble of ignorance. Lily was a walker. Her mom, Maria, worked double shifts at the local diner, the same one the Vanguards would eventually storm. So Lily walked herself to and from school every day. It was safe. Everyone knew everyone. Her route took her down Sycamore Street, past the park, and right by the old Henderson property. The Henderson house was the one wrought in the apple, abandoned for a decade. The bank owned it, but nobody claimed it. It was just a hollow shell of wood and dust, or so everyone thought. The town had learned to look past it, to treat it like a blind spot. But children see everything. They haven't learned to filter out the ugly parts of the world yet.
"I dropped my bouncy ball. It rolled through the fence. I went to get it, and that's when I heard it. It wasn't a cat. It sounded like humming, like a lullaby, but broken."
That was day one. Lily did exactly what she was supposed to do. She told an adult. She told her teacher, Mrs. Albright. She said there was a singing ghost in the Henderson basement. Mrs. Albright smiled, that tight, polite smile adults use when they stop listening. She told Lily she had a wonderful imagination and gave her a sticker. She didn't call the police. She didn't call the parents. She called it creativity. Inside a small, cluttered apartment, a tired mother, Maria, is counting tip money at a table. Lily is tugging on her sleeve. The mother looks exhausted and rubs her temples. Day 3. The humming had turned into crying, Lily told her mother. But Maria was exhausted, carrying the weight of the world on minimum wage. She thought Lily was acting out for attention, missing her dad, who'd left years ago. "We stay away from that house, Lily," she'd said. "It's dangerous because it's old, not because it's haunted. Eat your dinner." Maria wasn't a bad mother. She was just a tired one. And evil loves a tired witness. Day 7. Lily saw a man in a delivery uniform entering the back door of the abandoned house. He didn't have a package. He had a heavy padlock. Lily ran to the park where Officer Miller was stationed. She tugged his belt. She told him about the man and the crying lady. Miller looked down, his aviators reflecting her small, worried face.
"Kid, I checked that place last month. It's empty. Stop wasting police time, or I'm gonna have a serious talk with your mama about lying."
By day 20, Lily stopped telling people. She realized the horrifying truth that every victim eventually learns. Being loud doesn't matter if everyone else decided to be deaf. The crying from the basement got weaker. Then, yesterday, it stopped completely. Silence. A terrifying, final silence. That brings us back to the rain, to the gas station, to a little girl who realized the good guys were useless, so she went looking for the bad guys. She didn't choose the Iron Vanguards because they looked safe. She chose them because they looked like they could break down a door that the rest of the world pretended was locked. Civilization teaches you to ignore the small things, to walk past the homeless, to tune out the noise, to assume someone else will handle it. But the vanguards weren't civilized. They were survivors. And survivors survive because they notice what kills others. Bishop didn't just hear the girl's story. He was dismantling the scene like a bomb technician. While Officer Miller was busy puffing his chest out, Bishop was reading the signs written in the mud and rain. Red clay, not the black topsoil from the park. That's red clay, deep earth, the kind you only find when you're digging foundations or crawling under a crawl space. And it's fresh. She hasn't been playing. She's been crawling. He looked at the paper she'd shoved into his hand. A child's drawing usually has a sun in the corner and stick figures holding hands. This didn't. This was a blueprint of trauma. The lines were jagged, but the details were impossible to ignore. She hadn't just drawn a house, she'd drawn a specific type of padlock, a master lock heavy duty. She drew the hasp. She drew the way the boards on the basement window were nailed in and an X pattern. That wasn't imagination. That was observation. Then there was the smell. As the girl pressed closer to Bishop's leg for protection, a faint scent drifted up, cutting through the gasoline and rain. It was the smell of damp rot, old wet wood and stagnant air. The kind of smell that clings to you when you've been lying next to a ventilation shaft for hours. But the biggest sign wasn't on the girl. It was on the cop. Officer Miller wasn't acting like a peacekeeper. He was acting like a man trying to sweep dirt under a rug before the guests noticed.
"Officer, you said you checked the Henderson place last month, right? Empty?"
"That's right," Miller snapped, his voice a little too high, a little too fast. "Bank foreclosure. Totally secure. Now hand over the kid, biker. You're out of your depth."
Secure? Then why does this kid have red clay on her knees that only comes from a 3-foot dig? And why does she smell like a root cellar that hasn't been opened in 20 years? Kids lie about cookies, officer. They don't lie about the smell of death. You didn't check that house. You drove past it.
The rest of the vanguards moved. It wasn't a signal. It was a frequency they all shared. Rook, the club's sergeant-at-arms, lit a cigarette, shielding it from the rain, his eyes locked on the rookie cop. Tank crossed his massive arms. They saw what Bishop saw, the negligence, the dismissal, the incompetence that was about to cost a life. The signs were all there. The only question now was, what were they going to do about it?
Lily, right? You said she stopped screaming yesterday?
Yes, but I can still feel her. She's waiting. She's waiting for you.
There is a special kind of hell reserved for those who have the power to act but choose the comfort of paperwork instead. Officer Miller wasn't a villain in the comic book sense. He didn't lock the girl in the basement, but he was guilty of the greatest sin of modern society, apathy. He looked at Bishop, then at the little girl, and he didn't see a child in danger. He saw a nuisance. He saw a report he didn't want to file on a rainy Tuesday.
Listen to me, leatherhead, Miller spat, his patience snapping. I know who you guys are, the Iron Vanguards. I know your rap sheets. If you don't step aside and let me take the girl, I'm calling it in. Kidnapping, obstruction. I'll have every unit in the county here in 10 minutes.
While Miller was worrying about his authority, 3 miles away, in the suffocating darkness of the Henderson basement, time was running out. The woman in the walls, Sarah Jenkins, a 24-year-old nurse who had vanished 6 months earlier, wasn't worrying about jurisdiction. She was worrying about her next breath. She was chained to a support beam, shivering in the damp cold. She had heard the police car drive by weeks ago. She had screamed until her throat bled. She had heard the pause, and then the sound of the engine fading away. That was the injustice, not the chains, but the silence that followed them.
You talk about the law, Miller. But the law requires probable cause to ignore a witness. This kid gave you probable cause weeks ago. You just didn't like the packaging it came in. You saw a single mom and a problem child. You didn't see a victim.
He said I was lying. He said ghosts aren't real. But she's not a ghost yet. I promised her. I whispered through the vent. I said, I'm coming back.
Miller made his move. He reached out, his hand closing around Lily's small shoulder, pulling her roughly away from the biker. "That's enough," he shouted. "You're coming with me, and we're going to the station." The air in the gas station froze. Bishop moved faster than a man his size should be able to. His hand, thick with muscle and calluses, clamped over Miller's wrist. He didn't squeeze enough to break it, yet, but enough to stop the blood flow.
Let go of the girl. We're going to that house. You can follow us, you can call your backup, or you can try to stop us. But if you try to stop us, you better be ready to explain to the news crews why you fought harder to arrest a veteran than to save a kidnapped woman. Your choice, officer. Miller's eyes darting around. He sees the witnesses recording on phones from the diner window. He releases his grip on the girl. He steps back, hands shaking. He saw the phones in the window. He saw the resolve in the biker's eyes. He realized that this wasn't a fight he could win on the pavement. "Fine," he hissed, retreating to his car. "I'm calling it in. But if that house is empty, Bishop, you're going away for a long time." Bishop didn't answer. He turned to Lily. "You ride with me, little bit. Show us the way." He lifted her effortlessly, placing her on the fuel tank of his Harley, shielding her with his massive frame.
The Vanguards fired their engines. 12 V-twins roared to life, drowning out the rain, drowning out the officers' threats. The injustice ended now. The observation phase was over. It was time for the decision. The convoy hit Oakwood Street like a rolling earthquake. In a neighborhood defined by silence and drawn curtains, the Iron Vanguards were an invasion force. Engines rumbled low, a guttural growl that vibrated the windows of the sleeping houses. Bishop cut the lead engine first, coasting the last 100 yards. The others followed suit. Silence returned, but it was heavier now. They parked 2 houses down from the Henderson property. Strategy: never park directly in front of the kill zone. The house sat on a hill of neglect. It was a Victorian corpse rotting from the inside out. The windows were boarded, yes, just like Miller had said. The grass was waist-high, hiding secrets in the weeds. To the untrained eye, it was just an eyesore, a tax write-off. But Bishop and his men didn't have untrained eyes. They had eyes sharpened by years of patrol in hostile territories where a misplaced stone meant an IED.
Tank, take the rear. Rook, check the perimeter. Stay off the gravel. I don't want them knowing we're here until we're already inside. Lily, you stay behind Deacon. You point, we look. Understand?
Officer Miller's cruiser pulls up slowly, keeping a distance. The headlights wash over the bikers. Miller stays in the car, watching through the windshield, looking skeptical. He was waiting for them to find nothing so he could slap the cuffs on Bishop. He was watching the show, unaware that he was a supporting character in a tragedy he had helped write. Ruck, the club's sergeant-at-arms, moved through the shadows like a wraith. He bypassed the front door and went straight to the side of the house, pushing through a thorny hedge. He shone a pencil beam flashlight on the electric meter. It was spinning. Fast. An abandoned house with no occupants doesn't pull 20 amps of current. Someone was running high-draw appliances inside. Heaters? Lights? Or maybe ventilation for a soundproof room.
Check this. Camel Blues. Smoke down to the filter. The wrapper is still dry on the bottom. These were dropped less than an hour ago. Someone's standing guard here. Miller said this place has been empty for months. Liars always forget the small stuff.
That one. That's where the singing came from. I put a pebble on the ledge last time. See? It's gone. Someone moved the wood.
Bishop removed his helmet. He pressed his ear against the rough, cold concrete of the foundation. He closed his eyes, tuning out the wind, the distant sirens, the breathing of his men. He listened for the vibration of life. At first, nothing. Just the settling groans of an old house. But then, a rhythm. Thump, thump, drag. It wasn't footsteps. It was the sound of something heavy being dragged across a floor. And then, a sound that made the hair on his arms stand up. A cough, wet, weak, and stifled, like someone trying to be quiet because they know noise brings pain. It came from directly behind the concrete wall.
She's in there, and she's not alone. Miller can write all the tickets he wants later. Right now, we're not bikers. We're the rescue party. Tank, get the tool. We're going in.
The sound of steel sliding against leather as distinctive. When Tank pulled the Halligan bar, a firefighter's tool designed to tear through burning buildings, from his saddlebag, the air changed. It wasn't a rescue mission anymore. It was a breach. Officer Miller heard the metallic scrape. He dropped his coffee cup. It shattered on the asphalt, a jagged exclamation point in the quiet night. He wasn't staying in the car anymore. "Drop it!" Miller screamed, his voice cracking. "Drop the weapon! You touch that house, and it's breaking and entering. It's felony trespassing. I will put every single one of you in a cell tonight." The threat hung in the air, heavy and real. Prison wasn't a theory to men like the Iron Vanguards. Some of them had been there. None of them wanted to go back. "You worry about the statutes, Miller. That's your job. You protect the property. You protect the liability. But inside that basement, there's a woman praying for a miracle. And if the price of answering that prayer is a few years in a cage—" Bishop paused, looking at his brothers. They didn't flinch. They didn't look away. "Then that's a price we're willing to pay." This is the moment that separates the citizen from the sentinel. A citizen waits for permission. A sentinel acts on necessity. The vanguards operated on an older code. Vest and virtue wasn't just a slogan. It was a contract. The vest was the armor against the world, but the virtue was what you carried inside. And right now, virtue demanded violence. "Deacon, get the kid clear. Put her behind the oak tree in the yard. If shots are fired, you cover her. She sees nothing, she gets hurt by nothing. You are her shield. Do you copy?" "Copy, Cap. She's safe." Deacon moved Lily into the shadows. The innocence had done its part. Now it was time for the wolves to work. "Do it!" The sound was deafening in the quiet suburb. Crack! The dry, rotted wood screamed as Tank leveraged 400 pounds of torque against the frame. Rusty nails popped like gunfire. Miller drew his weapon, shouting orders that nobody listened to. But the sound of the wood breaking wasn't the loudest noise. It was what came from inside the hole they just made.
A scream. Not a ghost, not a memory. A real human scream of terror. "No, don't hurt me!" It was raw, it was immediate, and it confirmed everything. "Did you hear that, officer? That's the sound of your empty house. Now, are you going to arrest me, or are you going to help me kick this damn door down?"
The scream hung in the air, a jagged shard of reality that punctured Officer Miller's bureaucratic bubble. There is no regulation, no code section, no paperwork that accounts for the sound of a human being begging for their life. Miller lowered his Glock. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking less like an authority figure and more like a man who'd just realized he'd been standing on a landmine for 3 weeks. He looked at Bishop, not with anger, but with a terrifying clarity. Bishop didn't wait for an apology. He didn't have time for "I told you so." He vaulted through the jagged opening, boots hitting the concrete floor with a heavy thud. Tank followed, his massive frame barely fitting through the gap. The air inside wasn't just stale, it was thick. It tasted of chemical cleaner, damp earth, and fear. The temperature dropped 10 degrees the moment they crossed the threshold. They were in the belly of the beast now. Tank swept his light to the corner. A card table sat amidst the debris. On it, a burger wrapper and a styrofoam cup. Tank reached out with a gloved hand and touched the cup. He pulled his hand back, eyes widening. Steam curled into the flashlight beam. The heat signature of a ghost who wasn't a ghost at all. "Coffee's hot, Cap. He didn't leave hours ago. He's here. He's in the house right now." Above them, the house groaned. A floorboard creaked, distinct, rhythmic.
It was the heavy, deliberate step of a man who knows he has been discovered. The hunter had become the hunted, but a cornered rat is the most dangerous animal in the world. Bishop drew a heavy wrench from his belt. Bikers don't carry badges, but they carry tools that can break bone just as easily as bolts.
They pushed deeper. In the center of the basement, a partition had been built. A heavy door reinforced with 2x4s and a heavy iron slide bolt. From behind it, the whimpering had turned into a frantic, hyperventilating gasping. The woman knew someone was out there, but she didn't know if it was her savior or her executioner coming to finish the job.
Sarah? Sarah Jenkins? My name is Bishop. I'm with the Iron Vanguards. Lily sent us. The little girl with the pink backpack? She told us you needed help. We're going to open this door, okay? Nobody is going to hurt you ever again. Bishop's hand touched the cold iron of the bolt. Blam! The sound was like a cannon in the confined space. Wood splinters exploded from the ceiling joist inches from Bishop's head. Plaster rained down. The shot came from the kitchen directly above. The captor wasn't running. He was engaging. He was shooting through the floor. Tank slammed into Bishop, knocking him behind a stack of old tires just as a second shot punched through the floor. Outside, sirens began to wail. Real backup was coming. But inside, the war had already started. Officer Miller appeared at the breach, his face pale but his jaw set. He tossed his radio aside. He wasn't a bystander anymore. "Bishop!" he yelled over the ringing in their ears. "I'll take the stairs! You get the girl!" Redemption is a steep staircase, and Officer Miller was taking it 2 steps at a time. The hesitation that had paralyzed him at the gas station was gone, burned away by the muzzle flash that had just tried to kill 2 men in the basement. He hit the stairs hard, his boots thundering against the wood. He wasn't thinking about procedure anymore. He was thinking about the little girl outside who had trusted him and how he had failed her. He wasn't going to fail again. Down in the dark, Bishop made a choice. He let Miller take the fight. His war was different. His war was against the lock in front of him. Tank moved to the base of the stairs, weaponless but ready to catch any body that fell, friend or foe. Bishop grabbed the slide bolt. It was rusted, stuck with months of grime and cruelty. He gritted his teeth, the veins in his neck bulging as he applied force. Metal shrieked against metal, a sound like a dying animal. Crash! Miller kicked the kitchen door off its hinges. "Police! Drop it!" The room was a mess of dirty dishes and takeout boxes. In the center stood the architect of this nightmare. He wasn't a monster in a mask. He was a balding man in a stained undershirt, shaking like a leaf, clutching a cheap .38 revolver. He looked ordinary. That was the most terrifying part. Evil doesn't always wear a cape. Sometimes it wears khakis and lives next door. The bolt snapped back. Bishop pulled the door open. The smell hit him first, sickness and despair. He shone his light, not directly in her eyes, but at the floor. Sarah Jenkins was huddled in the corner, knees to her chest, trembling so violently it shook the chains around her ankle. She didn't look up. She was waiting for the punishment she thought was coming. "Sarah, look at me. I'm not him. Look at my hands. No keys, no weapon, just hands. We're getting you out of here."
The girl? The little girl? I heard her whisper. Did she send angels?
Something like that. Although I don't think angels ride Harleys or look as ugly as me. Hold still, Sarah. This is going to be loud. Upstairs, Tank bursts through the floorboards. Literally. He couldn't fit up the stairs fast enough.
so he rammed his shoulder through the rotten pantry floor from the basement, grabbing the captor's ankle. Upstairs, the standoff was breaking. The captor was aiming at Miller's cover, but he forgot about the basement. He forgot about Tank. The floor near the pantry exploded upwards. Tank, tired of waiting, had found a soft spot in the wood and punched through like a surfacing submarine. His massive hand wrapped around the captor's ankle. The man screamed, firing a shot wildly into the ceiling as he was yanked down to the floor. Miller didn't hesitate this time. He vaulted the island, landing on the captor before the man could recover. Handcuffs clicked, the cold steel of justice finally finding its mark. Tank pulled himself up through the splintered hole, dusting off his leather vest. He looked at the pinned criminal, then at Miller.
Nice tackle, officer. You might make a decent prospect one day. Snap! The chain fell away. Sarah didn't try to stand. She collapsed forward, but she didn't hit the floor. Bishop caught her. He unzipped his cut, the heavy leather vest with the club patches, and wrapped it around her frail shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of the road. It was a shield. "I got you," he whispered. "The bad man is gone. We're going outside. You're going to see the sky." The ascent from the underworld is never easy. The wooden stairs, which had creaked under the weight of the captor's malice for months, now groaned under a different burden, salvation. Bishop didn't rush. He moved with the steady hydraulic power of a machine. Sarah weighed nothing. Months of starvation had seen to that, but she felt heavy. She carried the weight of 6 months of darkness. Bishop held her tight against his chest, shielding her face from the dust, from the splinters, from the memory of the basement.
They emerged into the kitchen. The air here was different. It smelled of stale grease and the captor's fear. They walked past the mundane artifacts of a lie, a calendar on the wall, a fruit bowl with rotting apples, a home sweet home cross-stitch. It was a museum of deception. Sarah flinched as they passed the kitchen table, burying her face deeper into Bishop's leather cut. This wasn't a home. It was a cage disguised as a castle.
Bishop kicked the front door open. The world exploded into view. After the sensory deprivation of the basement, the night was a chaotic symphony. Red and blue strobes cut through the mist like lightsabers. Sirens chirped and wailed. The squawk of police radios filled the air. The neighbors, those who had slept soundly while a woman screamed into the earth, were now lined up on the sidewalk, phones out, faces illuminated by the glow of screens. Voyeurs to a tragedy they helped ignore.
"Line it up! Vanguards, wall up! Nobody sees her face. Give her dignity. Eyes out." The club didn't need to be told. They formed a gauntlet of leather and denim, a human tunnel. They turned their broad backs to the gawking crowd, creating a private sanctuary in the middle of the public circus. They weren't just protecting her body, they were protecting her moment. The first breath of freedom shouldn't be taken in front of a camera lens. It should be taken among guardians.
She's real. I didn't make her up. She's real.
Careful. She's fragile. Her ankles are raw. And keep the vest on her. She's shivering. I'll come get it later.
Sarah Jenkins felt the cold air hit her lungs. Sharp, clean, and tasting of ozone. It was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. She looked up past the flashing lights and saw the moon. Just a sliver of white in a dark sky, but it was there. She reached a trembling hand out as if to touch it. She was out. The concrete box was behind her. The monster was gone.
Then came the other exit. Officer Miller and Tank dragged the captor out of the house. The captor is handcuffed and stumbling. The crowd goes silent as they see him. There was no dignity here, no protective wall. They let the neighbors see him. They let the town see the man who had bought his groceries at their store and waved at their kids, all while keeping a human being in a cage. The silence of the crowd was deafening. It wasn't just shock, it was shame. They were looking at the monster they had allowed to exist.
You better pray the cops keep you in solitary, pal, because where you're going, there's a lot of bikers, and we talk. We talk loud. Adrenaline is a loan with high interest. When it wears off, the debt comes due in the form of exhaustion. 2 hours later, the Oak Creek General Hospital was quiet, save for the hum of vending machines and the squeak of nurses' shoes. Outside, the Iron Vanguards bikes were parked in a row, occupying the ambulance bay fire lane. Security didn't ask them to move. Tonight, those bikes had earned their parking spot. Inside, the Vanguards looked like bulls in a china shop. Their leather creaked, their boots left mud on the pristine tile, and they smelled of gasoline and sweat. But no one complained. The nurses walked by with nods of respect. They knew who had brought the girl in. They knew who had done the work. Officer Miller entered the waiting room. He had cleaned up slightly, but looked aged. He holds 2 cups of coffee. He approaches Bishop. The room went silent. Tank opened one eye.
Black?
Black, like the mood, Miller replied. He took a breath. She's stable, malnourished, dehydrated, broken ankle, but she's alive. Doctor says another week down there, and her heart would have given out. You boys made the call I didn't make. We all wear blinkers, Miller. Sometimes the badge gets in the way of the eyes. You stepped up when the lead started flying. That counts. Just next time a kid tells you there's a monster, maybe check under the bed before you call him a liar. Miller nodded, swallowing the hard truth. Before he could answer, the automatic doors slid open. Maria Rodriguez and Lily walked in. Maria had been at work when the police called. She looked like she had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. But Lily looked like a soldier returning from a victorious campaign. Maria didn't care about the mud or the reputation of the club. She went straight to Bishop and took his hand. "They told me," she sobbed. "They told me my baby was right, and I didn't listen. They told me you saved that woman. Thank you. Thank you for believing her when I was too tired to hearing her." "Don't thank me, ma'am. I'm just the wrecking ball. She's the architect. Your daughter has more guts in her pinky finger than most men have in their whole body. You raise her right, and maybe teach her how to ride a bike one day. Here, this is a guardian bell. We put 'em on our bikes to scare away the road gremlins. Legend says they work better when they're given by a friend. You keep the bad things away, Lily. You proved that tonight. You're part of the pack now." 3 days later, the noise had faded. The police reports were filed. The news crews had moved on to the next tragedy. And the town of Oak Creek was trying to return to normal. But for Sarah Jenkins, normal was a foreign country she had been exiled from for 6 months. She sat in the sterile quiet of room 314, trying to relearn how to breathe air that didn't taste of fear. The doctors said her body was healing quickly, but the soul takes its own time. A knock on the door broke the silence. It opened to reveal Bishop. The man looked absurd in a hospital room, like a grizzly bear trying to have tea in a dollhouse. He seemed bigger here than he did in the basement, his presence filling the space. Behind him, holding on to his denim pant leg like an anchor, was Lily.
You came. I wasn't sure if I dreamt you both.
We're real, Sarah. As real as the sunshine coming through that window. Just wanted to make sure they were treating you right in here. If the jello is bad, Tank said he'd come down and have words with the chef.
You aren't humming anymore. In the vent, you sounded like a broken bird. Now you sound like a real lady. I like your voice better now.
Sarah covered Lily's hand with her own thin hand. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but they are happy tears. There are bonds that go beyond friendship or family, bonds formed when one soul refuses to let another sink into the abyss. Lily hadn't just heard a noise in a basement. She had heard a soul crying out, and she had answered.
We had this cleaned. Got the smell of that place off of it. The club voted last night. You wore our colors in a battle, Sarah. You survived hell. This vest, it belongs to you now. It's armor. Keep it close. When you look at it, you remember that you aren't the victim anymore. You're the survivor.
Sarah ran her fingers over the weathered leather. It was heavy, thick, and smelled faintly of oil and the open road. It was the smell of freedom. It was a promise in physical form. The police had given her justice, but the bikers had given her something more important. They had given her back her strength.
We got a run to make, but listen to me. You need anything, a ride, a moving truck, or just someone to stand outside your door so you can sleep at night. You call the Vanguards. You're family now, and nobody messes with family.
The door closed, leaving Sarah alone in the quiet room. But the silence wasn't terrifying anymore. It was peaceful. She pulled the heavy leather vest closer, wrapping herself in the armor of the Iron Vanguards. Outside, she heard the distant rumble of motorcycles starting up. It was the best lullaby she had ever heard. The road is a long gray ribbon that divides the world. On one side you have the comfortable lie, the belief that someone else is watching, someone else is listening, someone else will save the day. On the other side, you have the hard truth, the truth that says if you see something broken, it is your job to fix it. The Iron Vanguards rode out of Oak Creek that evening, leaving behind a town that was a little less perfect, but a whole lot more honest. This story wasn't just about a rescue. It was about a wake-up call. Officer Miller learned that a badge doesn't grant you sight. You have to choose to see. The town of Oak Creek learned that evil thrives in the silence of good neighbors. And Sarah Jenkins? She learned that family isn't just blood. Sometimes family is 12 strangers in leather who refuse to leave you in the dark.
We often judge people by what they wear. A suit means success. A uniform means authority. A leather vest means trouble. But in that basement, when the chips were down, the suit was empty, and the uniform was blind. It was the leather vest that became the armor of righteousness. It was the troublemakers who brought the peace.
And then there's Lily, the smallest warrior. She reminds us of the most important lesson of all. Instinct is a gift. When the hairs on your neck stand up, when a situation feels wrong, When a cry for help sounds like a whisper in a vent, listen. Don't let society explain it away. Don't let politeness silence your gut. So I have to ask you again. If you were standing at that gas station, in the rain, and a scared child pointed at a monster, would you wait for permission, or would you act? Would you be the bystander, or would you be the brother? Here at Vest and Virtue, we tell the stories of steel and soul. We believe that heroism is a choice you make every single day. If this story moved you, if it made you want to stand a little taller and listen a little closer, then join our club. Hit that subscribe button, like this video to help us spread the message, and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that even in the darkest basement, there is hope if good men dare to kick down the door. Keep your knees in the breeze and your eyes on the road. We'll see you on the next ride. Out.